All right, I want to go to Chad program right now. Gaetz is now officially the former pick of Donald Trump's for be the next attorney general. Chad, what happened?
Well, this is rather remarkable because Matt Gaetz was just here on Capitol Hill last night. He met most of the day with J.D. Vance and other Republican senators, members of the Judiciary Committee. There were some, like Marsha Blackburn, who kind of signaled that they would probably support him. But we knew that there were deep-seated problems with this nomination. And, he left the building last night and said, I look forward to doing this work and taking care of fentanyl and doing issues like that at the Department of Justice. Here is some instant reaction from Capitol Hill. Roger Wicker, the Republican senator from Mississippi, says this is a, quote, positive development. Remember, we think that the president-elect may have been burning an awful lot of capital here and putting a lot of Republican senators in tough spots who might not be willing to support this nominee because they viewed him as so badly flawed. Ron Wyden, who is a Democratic senator from Oregon, says that this is not surprising, and he said considering his manifest unsuitability. Now, here's the interesting dimension of this, Neil. So you had Matt Gaetz resign from Congress last week, and in his letter that was read on the House floor, he said, I do not intend to serve in the new Congress. Well, here's what's interesting. He was duly elected to the new Congress just a couple of weeks ago. So even though he wrote that letter and is not a member of the House of Representatives right now, he could write back to the clerk and say, sorry, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to go through the confirmation process to be the Attorney General, and I do intend to serve in the new Congress. Now, what is this all about? The math. Remember, we talked about them losing maybe 3 members, maybe even more if they go to the Trump administration in the House of Representatives. So we know that Elise Stefanik was going to step aside to become the UN ambassador, Michael Waltz to become the national security advisor, and then Matt Gaetz. So you had these numbers dwindling in the House. Now, we've not heard, to be clear here, if Matt Gaetz, in fact, will serve in the new Congress. And this all comes in the shadow of this Ethics Committee report that the Ethics Committee refused to put out yesterday. It seemed that the Democrats on the committee wanted it published. Michael Guest, the Republican from Mississippi who chairs that committee, said that there was not an agreement in the committee to put it out. And so I pressed House Speaker Mike Johnson on that this morning, and he said it was under his impression that it was not finished. And he also indicated, when I asked him directly, did he put his thumb on the scale to try to persuade the Ethics Committee not to release that report? He said, no, I certainly didn't do that in my role as Speaker of the House. So the question now, the Ethics Committee in the House, regardless of what Matt Gaetz' status is, they still have this Ethics Committee report. It's possible it could come out at some point. It's possible that Democrats and probably some Republicans, right after the Thanksgiving recess, they were talking about having a resolution to pry that loose from the Ethics Committee and vote on that on the House floor. That won't come until after Thanksgiving right now. But Matt Gaetz will not be the Attorney General nominee.
Joining me now is House Foreign Affairs Committee member Congressman Darrell Issa. Congressman, should Ukraine be allowed to use U.S. missiles to strike inside Russia? It was President Biden who allowed that. Should he have done it?
Ukraine should have been allowed to bring this war to a peaceful end, one that was negotiated from a position of U.S.-backed strength, and they weren't. So now in the last minutes of this administration, this is a very questionable tact and one that President Trump's going to have to straighten out in just a matter of days.
It puts President-elect Trump in a bind, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It creates a situation in which clearly he's going to inherit a much more volatile situation. And quite frankly, I suspect the outgoing administration is going to say, oh, we already tried that. We did that, trying to take any credit from some initiative President Trump undoubtedly will author.
What do you make of Putin's nuclear saber rattling? Is that all it is? It's just a symbolic?
The most important thing to Putin is to cling to power. If he uses nuclear weapons, he will lose his hold on power. So I don't suspect that it's real, but we have to take it seriously, just as 10,000 North Korean troops being added as cannon fodder have to be taken very seriously.
Congressman, Israel's military says it seized a stockpile of Russian weapons in Lebanon. They say many of these weapons are modern and they came from stockpiles in Syria. This is not a good development, is it?
No, not at all. And as much as 40% of what we find in Hezbollah caches came in through as processed weapons through Syria. Others came in as components, some of them from Iran. The reality is that we have to deal with more than just Hezbollah or Hamas. We have to deal with those who supply them, which includes Syria, which is backed by Russia, and then, of course, Iran, that is backed by Russia and China right now.
You may be the next chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. If you were that chair, what's your priority number one?
One of the number one priorities is to engage all the members of the committee in being educated and prepared to help the Congress make good decisions. One of the others that's critical is Foreign Affairs has to team up with armed services so that we can lead the effort on military aid to other countries and our diplomatic mission. It's something that's been sorely missed during the last 4 years. Clearly, I have a long-standing friendship with incoming Secretary Rubio, and I know he appreciates the role of Congress, so I hope that we're working very closely together.
Congressman Darrell Issa, thanks for joining us this morning.
Welcome back. We are exactly now 1 month away from a potential government shutdown on December 20th. Speaker Mike Johnson pushing for a continuing resolution again, which would extend the deadline into early 2025 and Trump's second term. Republican Ohio Congressman Max Miller coming out against that plan. He's urging Congress to pass a full-year deal so Trump can quickly move his agenda forward and not be slowed down by a funding fight. House Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris wants to attach the SAVE Act to the government funding bill. The SAVE Act would require voters to provide proof of citizenship when voting in federal elections. Joining me now is Wisconsin Congressman Brian Stile. He's the chairman of the House Administration Committee and a member of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Would you support that, putting the SAVE Act attached to a budget, funding bill?
At the end of the day, this is going to be President Trump's call as to what we want to lead with as he comes into office on January 20th. All of us would like to see the SAVE Act passed. We're going to have an opportunity to get real election integrity legislation into law when President Trump comes to office on January 20th. If we want to be able to clear the deck for the president and get the spending bills done first, so we can focus in on the big things when he arrives, that's just great. If he would like us to do a short CR into the beginning of next year so that we can get through this gap period while we have Democrat control in the Senate and then hit the ground running next year, that works also. At the end of the day, it's a play call that the president is going to make because there's so much work where we need to get our country back on track. I'd love to see us get the spending bill done for the year, but at the end of the day, I think President Trump is going to make that play call, and we're going to be in a position to execute it.
I mean, we probably would not be in a position to watch swing states doing recounts right now. It is, after all, November 20th, and the election was November 5th, and yet in Pennsylvania, the Senate candidate Bob Casey refuses to concede, and they have openly admitted that they are counting illegal ballots from people who are non-citizens. So if you had the SAVE Act in place, we would not be in this place today.
Well, you need a lot of things in place to make sure we're not in this situation. You not only have the situation playing out at the Senate level in Pennsylvania, we have multiple House races in the state of California where they're still counting votes.
Right.
This is the problem where states in our country allow ballots to arrive after Election Day. Then you often have a debate about what happens if an individual didn't date their ballot appropriately, if there's not a barcode from the USPS on that ballot. The solution to this is what most states do, states like my home state of Wisconsin or the state of Florida, that simply says your ballot needs to be in by the time the polls are closed. That solves a lot of the problems that we're seeing playing out across the country. We need to do that. We need photo ID. We need to make sure only U.S. citizens are voting in U.S. elections.
Yep.
As we come into unified Republican government control, we have a big opportunity to move forward legislation as it relates to election integrity. As chair on the Committee on House Administration, we're working vigorously right now to make sure that we have that legislation in place so we can move it and have it signed into law by President Trump. I think it needs to be one of our absolute top priorities in the House.
All right. Well, we'll be watching you work on that. Meanwhile, President-elect Trump building out his administration, tapping Trump transition team co-chair and Cantor Fitzgerald CEO Howard Lutnick as Commerce Secretary. He'll be partly responsible for overseeing trade and tariffs. tariffs. Trump also nominating former Wisconsin Congressman and Fox Business host Sean Duffy as Transportation Secretary. The president said Sean will use his experience and the relationships he's built over many years in Congress to maintain and rebuild our nation's infrastructure. Your thoughts on Trump's picks?
I know Howard Lutnick well. I know Sean Duffy well. Let me tell you out of the gates, Sean Duffy is a great pick for the Department of Transportation. The picks across the board here by President Trump are positive. He's moving quickly. He's looking to shake up Washington, D.C. at a period of time where we have to shake up Washington, D.C. so it starts working on behalf of the American people so we can get this country back on track. We're seeing time and again President Trump moving quickly, moving boldly, and ready to shake up Washington, D.C. That's what the voters voted for in November. That's what I'm ready to do. And I'm excited when we're going to be able to hit the ground running on January 20th when President Trump is signed into office.
Yeah, and we'll see how the Senate responds to all of these picks in early January when the 119th Congress begins. The hearings will begin early January. So we've got more to come on that. But, Congressman, you're deploying congressional election observers to Iowa's first district for the official recount. I want to get back to this for a second because Democrat Christina Bohanian asked for a recount last week. She trails Republican incumbent Mariannette Miller Meeks by about 800 votes. The AP has still not called this race, which is incredible to me. How crucial is this race for Republicans' majority? Because little by little, you're going lower and lower in terms of the majority here, right? Now you've got a razor-thin margin again.
Yeah, we're seeing trend lines in the wrong direction in California. Michelle Steele is down by a bit. We need to get John Duarte back above the line. And again, we're frustrated with the delay in counting. In Iowa, they're beginning a recount with Mariannette Miller Meeks. I've deployed 10 election observers to the state of Iowa from the United States House of Representatives to be our eyes and ears and observers on the ground. This is part of our robust election integrity project from the Committee on House Administration, our commitment to make that only legal votes are counting and that we're following the laws. What we saw 4 years ago with Mariannette Miller Meeks' seat, where in that case she won by simply 6 votes. What we saw was Democrats trying to actually kick her out of office. And at the end of the day, through the Committee on House Administration, the work of others like Representative Rodney Davis, we were able to push back against the Democrats and make sure that Mariannette Miller Meeks, the duly elected representative from Iowa, won that race. What we're prepared for is all sorts of actions by the Democrats that we saw 4 years ago, is why we're deploying 10 election observers to observe this recount. So we are in a position to defend this seat when Mariannette Miller Meeks is ultimately identified as the winner by the state of Iowa.
All right, here's Todd Pyro.
What's your biggest concern, Congressman? What specifically will these observers be looking for in terms of irregularities or, dare I say, illegalities?
They're the eyes and ears on the ground to document what is occurring. I'm of the view that when the cat's away, the mice will play. We're putting in place the cats, the eyes and ears on the ground, to make sure that everyone is following the rules. In the event that one of these observers who are professionally trained by our committee would observe anything nefarious, the first thing they do would be call me and the attorneys that we have on staff. We deployed election observers across the country, places like California, Pennsylvania, my home state of Wisconsin. And on Election Day, those men and women played a vital role, making sure that the rules were being followed in every location across the country. These 10 individuals will be on the ground, will be observing the election process, making sure that the rules are followed and making sure that we have documentation of exactly that occurring.
All right. Well, that's certainly something I know you'll be working on in terms of new rules and regulations around voting. But what would you say is your priority in the 119th Congress next year?
But I think election integrity needs to be number one. We have unified Republican control. There's obvious things that we should have in place across the country, such as photo ID. This is an 80-20 issue across the country. You need a photo ID to go buy a 6-pack of beer, to board an airplane, to open a bank account. Good grief. You should need a photo ID to vote in the United States of America. We can get ourselves to a spot where we can really enhance election integrity, increase Americans' confidence in our elections. And if we do that, that's to the benefit of the democracy, and in particular, to the benefit of all future elections in the United States of America.
Yeah, we've been covering a lot of the retail earnings this morning, and TJX is out with its numbers. They beat expectations on revenue of $14.1 billion and on earnings of $1.14 a share versus an estimate of $1.09. But everybody we speak with, Congress, says the same thing, that consumers are stretched, that the economy is not what it appears from the headlines. What would be the most important sort of trigger or spark to get this economy moving in a real substantial way?
Well, so many people are being impacted by the inflation of the Biden-Harris administration still. We need to do three key things to bring inflation down, in my opinion. One, you got to control the reckless spending. I think we're in a position to do that. Two, you need to reduce the burden of regulation that the Biden administration continued to place on Americans and on businesses and on employers. President Trump is ready to go. He has a great series of appointments who are ready to rip that open. And then three, you got to unleash American energy. We need a national energy policy, not only to produce it out of the ground, but to deliver it to where it's needed in the end. If we focus on those three things, we can substantively bring down inflation. Americans will be far better off because the dollars they're earning will go much further and will address the pain that folks are feeling day in and day out.
Congressman, thank you. We'll be watching your work. Brian Stiles joining us this morning. We'll be right back.
Former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy and the Environment, and former Goldman Sachs Vice Chair Bob Hormats. Bob, let's keep in mind that President Biden kept the Trump-era tariffs on China in place for the past 4 years. Yes. That said, we're looking ahead now. Do you see the Trump tariffs as tactical or just paint everything with the same brush?
Well, the point Gary was making, I think, is something we ought to bear in mind. There are specific reasons, and it's in American law as well, that the president has the authority to use tariffs if countries are doing things like dumping in the United States or doing things that adversely affect American security. But the president-elect has been making the point that he is talking about blanket tariffs, 10 to 20% on all countries and maybe even 60% on China. That's a very different animal because that would have an effect on a whole range of American companies, companies that use Chinese parts, companies that source in China to make cars or various other things. And also, if you go into your neighborhood Walmart or Target, it's going to raise the price of all the goods that they import from China and sell to you as a consumer. So for specific purposes, yes. For broad purposes, it's going to be much more damaging to the economy and to the average American.
Sort of the unintended or opposite effect of what the tariffs are supposed to do. Now, the tariffs, Donald Trump has made very clear, would be to help American companies and American farmers. But we have this from the American Soybean and Corn Farmers Association, and they have anticipated, they've crunched the numbers, and they see a huge trade war hit to what they are trying to do to make a living, $7.3 billion in annual production value cost. So how do you get around something like that?
Well, they've raised a very interesting point. The Chinese are not just going to sit there if the United States imposes these huge tariffs and keeps them on there. If they can negotiate, put them on there as a tactic, as a tool, and negotiate some arrangement, that's one thing for a short period of time. If they're on there for a long period of time, the Chinese are going to retaliate. And how would they retaliate? They would retaliate against goods that Americans sell. What do Americans sell? One of the biggest products we sell to China are farm goods, and the farmers have a reason to be concerned about that, but so do a lot of high-tech companies. A lot of high-tech companies sell to China, not for security-related production, but for other reasons.
You've sat across the negotiating table from the Chinese on many levels when you were Undersecretary of State. What's going through their mind right now? I mean, where is the Chinese-U.S. relationship today, and where do you anticipate it will be after the inauguration?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I don't think they do, but obviously they are thinking about this. The Chinese don't like uncertainty, and therefore the uncertainty of all this does sort of rattle them a little bit. But they also are looking at the United States and the big divisions we have and saying, look, our ability, our rise, even though we have economic problems, which they freely admit, our rise in the world is going to be enhanced by the fact that Americans are having these big internal fights. And the other part of the problem is that the Chinese are saying to themselves, we want to be the most influential country in the global economy. And if the U.S. starts pulling back or continues to pull back with no trade agreements and barriers, not just against China, but against a wide range of other countries, including allies, it gives the Chinese an edge up in shaping the new global system. We have to be aware of this. It's not a free good.
Okay, but we also can't ignore the Taiwan piece of all of this. Taiwan is home to perhaps one of the most important companies on the planet, and that would be Taiwan Semiconductor. Yes. And why? Because the biggest market cap company in the world, NVIDIA, here in America, makes the AI chips. They design them, but they are fabricated by Taiwan Semi in Taiwan. Do you see any kind of saber rattling that has gotten louder where the Chinese look like they would be making a more sort of tougher move against Taiwan?
They're certainly talking tougher about Taiwan, and they're having their planes circle Taiwan and their Coast Guard ships circle Taiwan with the
war games, all kinds of stuff.
War games, threatening things that don't really adversely affect Taiwan directly, but psychologically they do. And I think what they also understand is that Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, and I emphasize the word manufacturing company, we don't manufacture a lot of these semiconductors, they do. And they sell them to us and they sell them to China. So China really has no interest in destroying that company either.
So it's a delicate dance they have to make.
It's a delicate dance with a lot of ambiguities in it. And there are ways the Chinese could put pressure on Taiwan to move closer to China, but I don't think they want to do it with some Hamas kind of event where there's a lot of violence back and forth.
Let me ask you a cost-cutting question, because Donald Trump has said he is putting Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in charge of the Department of Government. You know, he wants to just wipe away a lot of the government spending so that he can then implement his tax cuts that he promised so many different groups. The Pentagon failed its 7th consecutive audit on Friday as the agency was unable to fully account for the more than $824 billion budget. What do you think happens there? Because if you look at what can be cut, it's not that much. There's something like $1.9 trillion after you take out Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, you know, the so-called special untouchable areas.
You're so right, Liz. I think the problem is you cannot simply take a broad brush and cut the budget. Each program has
something's got to give, though. This is ridiculous.
And at some point, there are going to be very difficult programs that are important to one constituency or another, or our national security, or older people, or younger people, where they're going to do this. You can't do this with a sledgehammer. You've got to have proficiency and knowledge of the individual programs to decide what the implications are of cutting. In the case of the Pentagon, you've got wars going on in various parts of the world. You want to project the ability of the United States to exercise influence around the world, and you also need strong deterrence, as the president himself has pointed out. So, and you need to give more money for technological advancement through DARPA and other programs. That costs money. So if we start cutting those programs, we damage our national security. We damage a lot of companies that have positions in various parts of this country and elsewhere. So you have to do this in a very careful way. It can't be a sledgehammer.
Surgical. Well, we'll
Surgical.
See. We'll see. I don't know if that's
requires a delicate
Ramaswamy
hand.
and Elon
Delicate
Musk's
hand.
mandate.
Right.
Bob, great to see you. Thank you
Great to
very
be with
much.
you.
Okay, this story. Welcome back. Lobbyists for the junk food industry reportedly gearing up, lobbying the Senate to try to stop the Senate confirming RFK Jr. as Trump's new HHS secretary. He says they're making America sick. Let's give a warm welcome to internist and cardiologist Dr. Peter McCullough. Doctor, it's great to have you on. What do you make of all this?
Robert F. Kennedy will unify the medical and the dietetics communities on important issues like the dangers of trans fats. These fats directly raise LDL cholesterol. They cause heart attacks and strokes. And while trans fats are out of the fast food supply like McDonald's, they are loaded into a ton of products on the grocery store shelves. Big Food is going to oppose him because it means product reformulation, and that's going to be time-consuming and expensive for the food industry.
Yeah, it's like seed oils are high in polyunsaturated fat. That causes inflammation. You know, Europe warns thousands of additives are poisoning the U.S. food supply. Europe does not let this stuff in. They even put warning labels for that stuff in their food products, doctor. But, you know, the junk food lobbyists are basically saying if RFK Jr. gets in, they're going to try to cut any funding to HHS through Congress's appropriations for what RFK Jr. wants.
You know, we can't let that happen. Just like in biopharmaceuticals, food industry corruption, these lobbyist groups wield too much influence. You know, the last two secretaries, Azar and Becerra, they were silent on this issue. They were slow walking getting trans fats out of the diet. I think RFK is not going to be corrupted, and he's going to improve the health of Americans and make America healthy again.
Doctor, so there's a turnstile, right, between the FDA, the big pharma. So the food supply making Americans sick, but then we sell drugs in the back end. Final word.
You know, we don't need to go down this pathway. A paper by Xi and colleagues in JAMA this week points out that half of Americans are eligible for Ozempic-like drugs with obesity and diabetes. We have to turn it around. It will start with diet and healthy choices, fitness, and improving the health of our country.
Make America healthy again. RFK Jr. wants to do that. So does Trump.
Look who's here. Brent Bozell's joining us. On The View, they called, well, look, these two, Mika and Brzezinski, the two of them, they called Trump a threat to democracy. And now they go down there and visit him in Mar-a-Lago. What are they up to, do you think, Brent?
Okay, well, let's look at the numbers first. First, this is the collapse of MSNBC. Since October, their ratings are down 53%. On the Rachel Maddow show, their numbers are down from 2.3 to 1.3 million. They've lost 1 million viewers. MSNBC in November 6th to 13th had 550,000 viewers nationwide. Compare that, by the way, to Fox, which was 2.2 million. Finally, in 2016, the last time Donald Trump ran and won, MSNBC was at 1.3 million, and it was up at 98%. So what's all this telling you? What it's telling you is that Donald Trump is in charge. The attacks that worked against him in 2016 backfired in 2020. The ratings show exactly what the public thinks. The support for the national news media, the trust in the national news media, is at 31%. It's at an all-time low. Now, the people at MSNBC could care less about the collapse of their network. What Joe Scarborough is trying to do is stop the bleeding, because they've got to do that, or that network collapses completely. The way you stop the bleeding is you go to the man who famously has no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, and you try to amend it so that you can go back on the air and you can be talking about him and no longer talking to him about a fascist, etc. So it's a smart move that Joe Scarborough made. It's even a smarter move that Donald Trump is making in welcoming him to Mar-a-Lago.
It's a wonderful thing. Brent Bozell, thanks for joining us, as ever. I know we'll see you again real soon.
President-elect Trump rounding out his cabinet as he returns to the White House, and it is fast approaching. Fox News Digital's political correspondent Brooke Singman live in West Palm Beach this morning with more. Brooke.
Good morning, Maria. That's right. President-elect Trump building out his cabinet, and he tapped Trump Transition co-chair and Cantor Fitzgerald CEO Howard Lutnick as his Commerce Secretary. Now, Lutnick will be partly responsible for overseeing trade, with Trump promising to impose at least a 60% tariff on all Chinese exports to the U.S. Maria, you spoke to Lutnick on this recently. Watch this.
What's the most important plan that people need to understand about Donald Trump and about his plans for the economy and taxes?
He will drive down the cost of gasoline. He will drive down the cost of energy, and he will drive down corporate taxes, which means they will build factories here, bring back farming, right? Tariffs will protect our farmers. Manufacturing will employ our people, and energy will drive down our costs, as we have oil, we have farmland, and we have incredible people who can do our workforce, and we're just killing them by supporting China and not putting tariffs on. It's got to end, and Donald Trump is the only person talking about these things.
Lutnick was originally in the running for Treasury Secretary. A source told Fox that the search is a free-for-all and a mad dash to find someone pro-tariff. Some are saying that former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh is the front-runner. He's alongside Key Square Group founder and CEO Scott Bessent, co-founder and CEO of Apollo, Mark Rowan, and Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty. Trump is also nominating Dr. Mehmet Oz to serve as the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator. Trump says Oz would, quote, cut waste and fraud within our country's most expensive government agency. And Linda McMahon has been chosen as Education Secretary. She served on the Connecticut State Board of Education, and she led the SBA during Trump's first term. Trump has vowed to dismantle the Department of Education and send education back to the states, with McMahon leading the charge. Other Trump nominees will meet with senators on the Hill this week. VP-elect J.D. Vance will escort Pete Hegseth and Matt Gaetz to their meetings. And Trump says he is not reconsidering Gaetz as Attorney General, despite bipartisan backlash over sexual misconduct allegations that Gaetz denies. The House Ethics Panel is meeting today on whether to release the findings of their investigation, despite Gaetz resigning from Congress. Vance also revealing in a now-deleted X post that the Trump team is interviewing candidates to lead the FBI, signaling Christopher Wray could be replaced before the end of his term. Names being floated for his replacement are former Michigan Congressman Mike Rogers and Kash Patel. So it is yet another busy week for President-elect Trump as he builds out his second administration.
Democrats claim President Trump is trying to politicize the civil service, but situations like the one at FEMA validate our concerns that it is already politicized.
FEMA appears to be plagued by poor decision-making and a serious lack of communication.
It's plainly wrong and divisive to use a presidential campaign lawn sign as a proxy for someone's dangerousness.
If that is going to be the protocol for how citizens get help from the emergency management agency, then it needs to be completely revamped.
Good evening. I'm Dagan McDowell.
And I'm David Asman. Welcome to The Bottom Line. Well, FEMA Administrator Dion Criswell facing the wrath of lawmakers after reports that members of the agency were skipping over storm-wrecked houses just because they appeared to be that of Trump supporters.
All the while, residents in Florida and Western North Carolina are still waiting on any assistance from this craptastic agency. Let's send it on over to Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram, who has more on this hearing from Capitol Hill. Hey, Chad.
Dagan, David, FEMA Administrator Dion Criswell found herself in the hot seat. There's been bipartisan criticism about how the agency responded to the two monster storms, but lawmakers said the magnitude did not matter.
For it to take 3 days for the visibility of FEMA is just not acceptable. There were folks in their homes not only without power, they couldn't flush toilets, they had no drinking water. We were shut off from the rest of the world.
Edwards said FEMA told him 400 pallets of water were delivered to Western North Carolina. But when Edwards specifically asked where, FEMA could not give a certain location. Florida Democrat Kathy Castor lamented how long it took to reestablish the basics of everyday life.
It took weeks in some places to get the power turned back on. We've got to be smarter about our electrical systems in this country and build in a more resilient way with microgrids, solar battery systems that can safeguard our critical infrastructure.
President Biden just requested nearly $100 billion to help refill FEMA's coffers and prepare for future disasters. Criswell said the dimension of the storms was staggering.
Because we had paused close to $9 billion in payments through our immediate needs funding for fiscal year 24. The cost to respond to these two disasters is outpacing all other disasters in the previous 10 years except for Hurricane Maria.
Congress must approve the extra money to help hurricane-ravaged areas recover. But some conservatives want to offset that spending by pulling money for programs to help shelter people illegally in the country. David, Dagan?
Chad, thank you very much.
President-elect Trump rounding out his cabinet as he returns to the White House, and it is fast approaching. Fox News Digital's political correspondent Brooke Singman live in West Palm Beach this morning with more. Brooke.
Good morning, Maria. That's right. President-elect Trump building out his cabinet, and he tapped Trump transition co-chair and Cantor Fitzgerald CEO Howard Lutnick as his commerce secretary. Now, Lutnick will be partly responsible for overseeing trade, with Trump promising to impose at least a 60% tariff on all Chinese exports to the U.S. Maria, you spoke to Lutnick on this recently. Watch this.
What's the most important plan that people need to understand about Donald Trump and about his plans for the economy and taxes?
He will drive down the cost of gasoline. He will drive down the cost of energy, and he will drive down corporate taxes, which means they will build factories here, bring back farming, right? Tariffs will protect our farmers. Manufacturing will employ our people, and energy will drive down our costs, as we have oil, we have farmland, and we have incredible people who can do our workforce. And we're just killing them by supporting China and not putting tariffs on. It's got to end, and Donald Trump is the only person talking about these things.
Lutnick was originally in the running for Treasury Secretary. A source told Fox that the search is a free-for-all and a mad dash to find someone pro-tariff. Some are saying that former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh is the front-runner. He's alongside Key Square Group founder and CEO Scott Bessent, co-founder and CEO of Apollo, Mark Rowan, and Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty. Trump is also nominating Dr. Mehmet Oz to serve as the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Administrator. Trump says Oz would, quote, cut waste and fraud within our country's most expensive government agency. And Linda McMahon has been chosen as Education Secretary. She served on the Connecticut State Board of Education, and she led the SBA during Trump's first term. Trump has vowed to dismantle the Department of Education and send education back to the states, with McMahon leading the charge. Other Trump nominees will meet with senators on the Hill this week. VP-elect J.D. Vance will escort Pete Hegseth and Matt Gaetz to their meetings. And Trump says he is not reconsidering Gaetz as Attorney General, despite bipartisan backlash over sexual misconduct allegations that Gaetz denies. The House Ethics Panel is meeting today on whether to release the findings of their investigation, despite Gaetz resigning from Congress. Vance also revealing in a now-deleted X post that the Trump team is interviewing candidates to lead the FBI, signaling Christopher Wray could be replaced before the end of his term. Names being floated for his replacement are former Michigan Congressman Mike Rogers and Kash Patel. So it is yet another busy week for President-elect Trump as he builds out his second administration. Maria?
Sure is, Brooke. Thanks very much.
Faulkner, co-host of Outnumbered and host of the Faulkner Focus on Fox News. Rich Lowry, editor-in-chief, National Review. Miranda Devine, ace New York Post columnist and also a Fox News contributor. Harris, I like the way you were boogieing there, so I'm going to lead off with you. Come on, we're together. One.
You do really? Now we're going to be a meme.
All right. But in all seriousness, now, this may not last. And we've seen presidential honeymoons before. I get all that. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've seen one this long, however, this intense. And I didn't see NFL players dancing your dance in the end zone. But it is interesting to me that I sense the country wants him to succeed.
Look, I don't think that Democrats were wrong when they first tried to run Kamala Harris, and she had a decidedly very long honeymoon period, too. It just didn't hang on when they first put her in over Joe Biden. But they weren't wrong that the country could use a little joy and uplift. Many people struggling just to get the groceries on the table and still being told that they're imagining their journey. So they weren't wrong about that. They just couldn't sustain it because the facts were against them. And, you know, so right now, I think that there is a sort of collective, okay, we've decided as a nation who the next president's going to be. We don't have to wait in limbo unless you're in like some state, Senate, and House races, what they still haven't called. That's a story for another hour. But you don't have to worry about that with the president. So now the joy can begin of what's next. When will the change come? And you see him like with whip-neck speed trying to get his cabinet picks in place and all of that. So he's moving forward to prove that he can get that done. He's also being true to who he is. It's the authenticity along the way.
Right.
Of course he's going to go to the UFC championships at MSG. Of course he's going to take that victory lap. And there are going to be people there that might not have ever said they wanted to vote for him that did.
And many of those people look like me. Many are Hispanic, Asian, as you mentioned.
And he just,
and
he
just to
doesn't
see
move
you
his lower
bust a
body.
move, right?
He doesn't use his lower bottle, but he's got a
Oh, he
nice
does. Have you seen the golf
body.
swing? That takes your feet because you got to end in the ice cream cone. I don't play golf, but I've been told that that's how it is. So just this last point. With putting the cabinet together and hearing the push against him potentially on the Hill with lawmakers, and then hearing these blue-led state Democrat governors saying they're going to defy the people's choice and push against everything he does in their interest, it's rich. And if they think they're going to win back voters that way, they're wrong. But the joy will reside on the right side of the aisle until the left decides to smile and move on.
Yeah, Miranda, that's an interesting point. The last thing that Harris, because I mean, I watched Phil Murphy, governor of New Jersey. I know Phil Murphy. He's a very nice man. I think he's lost his mind on this, but he's one of them. Kathy Hochul here in New York. Gavin Newsom, I'm not so surprised. I know him rather well, too, but that's a whole different story. But if they're going to stand in the way deliberately right at the outset, they're going to create so much ill will for themselves. The Republicans might wind up taking their states or even doing even better than they did in the last election, turning blue into red. I mean, it's folly for them to go after red. The guy hasn't even started yet, and the country seems to be behind him. How dumb are they?
It's really dumb because how well did that tactic work, Trump derangement syndrome, when Nancy Pelosi was running it? And, you know, they've now lost coast to coast. Even Nancy Pelosi's hometown of San Francisco swung to Trump by 7 points. You know, they've lost the House, they've lost the Senate, they've lost the Electoral College and the popular vote. Trump derangement, everybody saw through it. You've even got Morning Joe and Mika making the humiliating parade down to Mar-a-Lago to try and, you know, change sides. It doesn't work. It's been a disaster. So I don't know what these governors are doing, thinking that they can mount a resistance. Obviously, they're going to oppose some of the policies, but give the guy a chance, because calling him Hitler and demonising him, trying to employ lawfare against him, impeaching him, and then trying to assassinate him, it just made him stronger.
Rich Lowry, I just saw FNC Digital posting a story. Trump's 76 million plus, I think 76.4 million. That is the most votes any Republican president has ever received. He's still ahead in the popular vote by a couple of million. Of course, he's ahead in the Electoral College by a lot more than that. How do you read this? I mean, again, as I'll say, we've seen honeymoons before. Now, it may be, you know, his own personality, which is very ebullient, easy to follow. But I don't see it quite like this. I don't see anything quite like this that I can remember, even going way, way back to Reagan. Yes, you get a couple days, and then things settle down, and then you get into the transition. He's done everything at once with a loud bang and getting a massive following. What do you make of it?
First of all, let me thank you personally for not asking me to boogie on air. I really appreciate it, Larry. But let's pause on that Madison Square Garden moment.
Yeah.
Because if you said there's going to be a Republican politician going to UFC championship, and he's going to get huge applause. Rudy Giuliani, maybe after September 11th. Otherwise, no, it's not going to happen. So it just goes to the new audiences this guy has tapped into. And I think a huge part of what happened is there are a lot of voters probably in that garden and at MSG who are like, I'm a kind of a moderate, you know, I don't care about politics that much. But the left went so far, the Financial Times had a great piece about this, the Democrats went so far left, the center moved left. So you're a moderate, but now you're right of center, right? So now you're actually, I'm considering this guy because he's normal compared to the other people. And he actually made gains among moderates and made gains, as Miranda was alluding to, in a lot of blue areas because people are so disaffected with the disastrous misgovernance in our cities.
You know, the front page, front of the Wall Street Journal website right now is running a story how the biggest mistake the Democrats made was ignoring the inflation problem, both, you know, before, during, and after. But I want to ask you, Harris, cultural issues, I think, played a quieter but absolute key role in this election. Now, to some extent, it was all about biological men playing in women's sports. That was probably the tip of the iceberg. But people saw, heard things, didn't like the woke, didn't like the DEI affirmative action, didn't like the cancel culture. When I think about Madison Square Garden, I think about those young kids in there. Most of them are fairly young and probably under 35 or 40. I don't think they liked any of that stuff one bit.
So what you're talking about is the iceberg that's above the ocean, the part that you don't see, the bigger part of the iceberg that's holding the other part up. Really, there were just issues of race, culture, ethnicity that were played on the left in very dangerous ways by playing us against each other, by telling black men you don't support black women because you're misogynistic. You aren't voting for Kamala because you just don't know what you're doing. You're not really thinking straight. You're not really loving them, so on and so forth. And that came from a former president, Barack Obama. It wasn't like they were being mansplained by somebody they didn't know, but practically arms akimbo, he's telling them how to be black. It was a flashback to a time when Joe Biden said if you didn't vote for him and you were black, you weren't really black. You don't get to lecture cultures from a high place paying Beyonce and Oprah. Now we know she made not 1 million, but 2.5, Oprah, for showing up.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah, that happened today.
She really needed the money.
Well, I don't know. I'm not really into her finances, but, did Lizzo need millions? I'm not really sure. But anyway, women got paid, performers got paid to be on stage and not to sing. But just to support publicly Kamala Harris. And my point with that is she had a real disconnect with Hispanics and blacks in this country.
Right.
And Asians and other cultures and ethnicities and races saw that too and said, well, our bottom line isn't doing well either.
Yeah.
Like I interviewed all voters from every ilk, every age group, and they said, look, Harris, you're right, the color is green. The atmosphere has to be American dream driven, and this one isn't by Kamala Harris. She keeps laughing and she keeps smiling, and then she got serious toward the end and started calling people fascists and her vice presidential partner Tim Walz. Everybody at MSG for Trump is a Nazi and all this kind of stuff. So they're dividing. And then black people got really quiet. Where was James Clyburn until a couple of days ago when he was upset? What was going on?
Another submerged iceberg, though, was the opposition to this woke stuff. Most people, it happens in their workplace or, at a hospital or a medical office where these whispered conversations, this stuff is crazy. You're not a birthing parent, you're a mother. That training was insane, but I don't want anyone to know I think it's insane.
Yeah.
This was a way for people to make their dissent from all that audible. They could go in the voting booth in secret and make their views known by voting for a big middle finger to all that stuff in the form of Donald Trump.
I think he knew this. I mean, his closing ads had quite a bit of the cultural issue in them.
That brilliant line where he said, she's for they, them.
That's right.
Trump's for you.
That's right. And taxpayers paying for various transgender operations. Choices, people are going to make choices. Personal choices, that's up to them. Taxpayers paying for it, or taxpayers in prison paying for it, or the military. We're going to talk about the military later in the show. I just think it was just like a silent majority that was furious at this kind of stuff. We talked about this at Outnumbered the Sunday before the Tuesday election. It came up again and again. And I think a lot of people missed it. I think a lot of pollsters missed it as well. Miranda, can I jump to something maybe less euphoric, but very important? There's two issues here. One of them is the Pete Hegseth story in the Pentagon, and the other one's going to be the Matt Gaetz story in the Justice Department. But you wrote on the Pete Hegseth story, and what is it that they're going to do here? They have witnesses who are not good witnesses, not credible witnesses. What is it that they're worried about with Pete Hegseth?
Well, I don't think Trump is worried about him. I think Trump is going ahead with him. This is just the usual smear that every single member of this administration is going to suffer. And we've seen that Trump and his people are Teflon. They've thrown every smear possible at Trump. They've called him a rapist, a Nazi, you name it. And he won a landslide. So it doesn't work. I think people see it for what it is. Pete Hegseth is a danger to the blob, to the sort of military-industrial complex, because he's a real soldier and he's totally against the woke DEI, the endless wars, the pointless, military spending. And I mean, Matt Gaetz is the same thing. They're both kind of middle fingers by Trump to the deep state. It's telling them it's not going to be business as usual anymore. I'm not going to be Mr. Nice Guy like I was the first time.
One mistake that Trump made the first time around, generals are impressive, right? They tend to be good at one thing, right? Military affairs. Doesn't mean they're going to be good at politics. Doesn't mean they're going to have any political courage. Doesn't mean they're going to have original, good views, right? So now he's like, forget the generals. I'm going a layer below to a war fighter. And Pete's views on this, that the role of the military is to go out and break things and kill people, and you're not going to poison it with this idiotic DEI ideology, is extremely important.
What did you think about this? What is DEI? Is a form of I think of it as affirmative action on steroids. And I think people were I think the original affirmative action became very unpopular. Lawsuits at Harvard and University of North Carolina and places like that. Anti-Semitism is very unpopular. Somehow Democrats...
Anti-Semitism is wrong.
Of course, it's deadly wrong.
So it's not just unpopular.
It's morally wrong and it's unpopular. But I'm just saying, Democrats wound up lining up behind all of these things. They never really lifted a finger on anti-Semitism. They never really lifted, they defended woke to the bitter end. How could they be so stupid? There's no common sense here. Well, ordinary working folks, ordinary middle-class folks, how could they be so stupid?
Well, the goal is to control. So I had a guest on the Faulkner Focus recently who said DEI is didn't earn it. And the problem with that is that when you give, and I don't even know how constitutionally fair this is, but when, we are looking at things very much decades post-civil rights and other movements in this country, but particularly that one that had to do with affirmative action and other movements to try to right-size salaries and opportunity and all of that. But when you get into the land of merit, and where everybody's got to be looked upon now for what they can bring to the table, what people really want is a leg up. There are a lot of ways to help people without putting them into a category that has an acronym. Like that, there are a lot of ways to make sure that, well, maybe we give women some help with some daycare situation. That was a question at the town hall, the all-women town hall that I did with now President-elect Trump. There are a lot of things. Again, stop putting us in these categories. And diversity, part of the problem is diversity isn't just your skin color and your hair texture.
Correct.
I was raised military. I'm one lane. There are all sorts of things that make us diverse in a multiple type of situation on the job. We can't have everybody coming from the same sort of ilk. And that's diversity, but that's not really what we're saying. If I could just say one quick thing with regard to the nominees that the president is putting forth. You mentioned Pete Hegseth. I would say about that this nation actually watched a White House put up with the behavior of the current SecDef disappearing for days after a surgery that he did not disclose, and the White House didn't even know he was gone. So I think the bar is someplace where I can't see.
We'll know where he is, right?
Maybe
He's
it's
show up to work.
invisible, the sudden crisis of merit and concern. Pete Hegseth is a two-time Bronze Star winner in the military. Look, they're going to vet and depose everybody, I would think, right? Isn't that kind of how they're going to do it? Now, I don't know if they're going to use the FBI to do that. Trump has said he's had too much recent experience with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, so he might not want to. But when you come to these nominees, what do you say? You talked about the middle finger. That's a middle finger to the public who just voted for Trump. Do they really want to tick off voters that badly?
Can I read you Ruffini on this? He's a very smart guy. One of the authors of the new Republican Working Class Coalition has been writing about it for years in this piece today. Mr. Trump's new coalition members embrace a politics of aspiration and not a leftward shift towards dependency on government. And then here it is, growing up, they were told by their parents to support the Democratic Party. These are minority groups. Support the Democratic Party because it was the party of the poor. Their response, we don't have to be poor.
Yeah, there you go. So
the offer, not so much race. Yes, always there. I get that. Religion, always there. Ethnicity, always there. How about the economy? How about growth? See, Trump's playing to that. They remembered middle and lower income working folks remembered their take-home pay under Trump the first time.
Yeah, the implicit offer.
Pretty damn good.
The implicit offer to Hispanics that was implicitly rejected this year's from Democrats, you can be an oppressed minority too. Wouldn't it be great to be an oppressed minority, a victim group? You can be a victim group. And they're like, no, we want to be Americans and succeed like everyone else. A lot of polling showed that Hispanic voters cared more about the economy than white voters, right? So they don't like this ethnic pandering.
I love this. Their response: we don't have to be poor. I just love that. I
Well,
mean,
Kamala
that's a
proved that,
wonderful
right?
thing.
The only group she gained in over Biden and again Trump was people earning more than $100,000 a year. I mean, I think that Trump hit on something when he started to say, I'm going to cut taxes on Social Security. He's going on both ends of the spectrum.
And tips.
That's a
No
tight budget
taxes
when
on
you
tips.
retire.
Overtime.
Right.
Overtime.
Yeah.
So these are wage workers who aren't quite earning the wage that keeps up with now an inflation
hosts,
that's going back
overtime.
up, by the way,
Fox
right?
hosts overtime. Right. No taxes. No taxes.
No, but Friday, didn't the inflation rate tick back up again?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so I mean, Biden's
Next
going
segment,
out
we're gonna talk
on
about
some
that. They don't
bad
have-
news.
No, that's correct. I think that's right. Well, we will see if the joy continues. But right
Well,
now,
it is here.
right now, did you want to do a little
Dance.
something?
Yeah.
See, you just want me to you know what?
No,
I think you like to dance. Do we have music? I'll dance with you. Come on. But we need music.
Thank you, Rich Lowry, Miranda Devine, and Harris Faulkner.